Hello. Hi. So thank you for the opportunity to speak. Mi español no es bueno, entonces voy a hablar en inglés. So I'm going to talk today about the Tepal project that we have in Michoacán, Mexico, but a bit about the exploration insights to it. So I'm a geologist and I work with Corp Consultants and Defiance Silver Corp. Disclaimer. So a bit of an overview. So Tepal is 100% owned by Defiance Silver Corp, and it's an advanced stage porphyry gold copper cluster deposits located in Michoacán near the border of Jalisco State. You can see on the map here, Defiance Silver has two main projects. There's the Zacatecas project up in the north of the map here, and then Tepal is down in the southwest. So if you were hearing discoveries in the last few years, my colleague Jen has talked a bit about the Zacatecas projects, and I've been working with the group there for the last few years as well. But for this talk, I'll be focusing on Tepal project. So there's a 2012 mineral resource estimate of 1.8 million ounces of gold and 813 million pounds of copper. As you see, there's been quite a bit of drilling to date, and it has pretty good infrastructure with road accessibility and power. So now to put a bit of geological context to it. So we're located south of the Trans-Mexican volcanic belt in a zone of Mesozoic to Cenozoic plutonic intrusions. So right about there, right near this Hilotan batholith. And if we look at the 1 to 250K geological map by the SGM, we can see, again, this is this large batholith. They're Cretaceous to early tertiary. And it's thought that Tepal's mineralizing intrusions are related to these, but we don't have an age date yet on mineralization. And that little star is where Tepal sits. So now that a bit of a more overview, we're located southwest of Tepalcatepec in Michoacán, again near the border of Jalisco. And Tepal is broken up into three main deposits. There's the north zone, the south zone, and Tizate. What you see here on the left is an oblique view of the 3D leapfrog project with the 2012 mineral resource outline, and the yellow dashes you'll see on the subsequent plan maps, and those are just, again, to show the resource outline. And then I also have these red lines that are more of the higher grade core, which, again, you'll see on subsequent maps. So again, taking that away, you can see the drilling. And we're going to look at a little long section, the north zone and south zone. So this is a long section about 300 meters thick, looking toward the east-northeast. And you can see the north zone and the south zone and the drilling that's been done. There's gold along the drills, and you can see the coppers along the little graphs on the side. So the drilling has defined a mineral resource. However, many areas still remain open and untested. Now, comparing this to similar porphyries globally is really kind of to show that these types of deposits form in clusters, and some of which are blind. And as I go through the talk, I'll argue why, like, I have Cadia and Red Chris here in terms of the style of deposit. But it just goes to show you, if you look at Cadia and Ridgeway, it was really blind at surface. And then the recent work that they've been doing up at Red Chris, this East Ridge exploration target, again, quite deep in terms of the drilling and blind at surface. So it just kind of shows you that there's a need to drill deeper in these style deposits and explore nearby. And there's Tepal on the left at a similar scale with similar grades on the side. And thank you for Newmont for permission for these slides. So now I mentioned porphyry a few times, and what do we see in terms of the controls of mineralization? Well, we have these veinlets of gray banded quartz, pyrite, chalcopyrite, and magnetite, and they're really associated with some of the best mineralization in the north zone and the south zone. So again, likely the controls on gold and copper, as well as subsequent disseminated sulfides. And the alteration here is chlorite and probably chlorite after secondary biotite. So now, again, kind of looking again, a bit of a context with that. This is a cross-section of the south zone, a really simple cross-section, about 100 meters thick, looking northeast. And what you see in the little pattern is the inferred extent of like these mineralized porphyries with the veinlets. And then you see the copper and gold like iso lines or iso surfaces, around 0.2, 0.3% copper, and then we have 0.5 and 1 grams per ton gold. So you can see there's almost a one-to-one relationship with copper and gold. And you know, one of the deeper drill holes still hit 150 meters at 0.41% copper and 1.22 grams per ton gold. And really, this whole area is open, like it's not been tested fully to depth, and the width is undefined. So, you know, just in the south zone alone, there's low-hanging fruit for continued exploration. So again, deposit styles. So I've been, you know, saying porphyries a lot and showing the photos. And you know, what we see is these types of veinlets with the gray and banded quartz with sulfides plus or minus magnetite are typical what you get in shallow level and placed gold copper porphyries, typically more island arc related. And some examples of these globally are the Maricunga belt in Chile, the Stikini belts like in BC, Canada, which is like the Golden Triangle, and the Red Chris was one of the long sections I showed before. That's from that area, and Saddle North is another one of the deposits there. And then the Macquarie Arc in Australia, and that's where Cadia is, again, one of those long sections I showed in several slides ago. And here are some examples of the core and the porphyries with the same type of quartz, plus or minus magnetite, plus or minus banded veinlets. And this section on the side, this is from the Saddle North deposit. And again, you can see these types of porphyries, these gold copper ones, are narrower, but you know, potentially can have quite high-grade cores and can extend a bit more vertically. All right, so then we have Tezate, that's the third deposit. And this one shows a little bit of a different characteristic than just the north zone and south zone. You know, you see more sericite alteration here. We see potentially D-style veinlets with pyrite and sericite halos to it. There's some hints of like a potassic altered but potentially barren porphyries. And overall, the grades in Tezate, moly is higher, but gold and copper are lower grade in general. But we locally have some very, very high grade cross-cutting polymetallic veins, like the photo on the right here. You can see it's 25.3 grams per ton gold and kicking with other metals as well. All right, so that was a bit about, you know, the different deposits. Now I'm going to go into targeting for the rest of the talk. So, you know, surface work has been limited in recent years, but this has allowed us to kind of approach it from, you know, looking at what data we have and coming up with the best understanding, best targets in terms of future exploration. So one of the things, you know, for exploration targeting is to have a really solid geological and structural interpretation and map. And, you know, there's always a problem when you're dealing with, you know, lots of historic data where they contain multiple generations of facts and interpreted data. So what I did was a new compilation of structures using these historic data sets, so such as previous structural interpretations, surface mapping, interpretations on topography, DTM, magnetics, and geological government maps, and putting all those structures together, drawing buffers on larger structures, and where you have multiple structures overlapping one on top of another, you know, it gives them more higher confidence that, you know, that structure is real. And from that, we're able to do a structural interp. And this is now looking just at the deposits in terms of surface measurement. So this was taking from a lot of the mapping that was done in 2017, and, you know, plotting up the main faults and fractures, the secondary faults and fractures, the larger fault zones, potentially with gougy fault material, and then the quartz veins. So what we can see in the stereograms here are a dominantly north-northwest striking trend, and then east-northeast and northeast faults. And then you look at some of the quartz veins, at least the north and south zone, we see more of a north-northwest trend, and Dezati is a bit more of a northeast trend. So pulling that together, so now this is the new regional structure interpreted map. And what we see is that we see dominantly east-northeast, north-northwest striking faults, and to a lesser degree, but also quite relevant, are northeast striking faults, with a bit of a buffer zone about the zone of influence around them. So these are basically our arc perpendicular and our arc parallel faults, and they played a critical role in the location and elongation of mineralization. And similar trends you can see in those two different porphyry styles as well. So that's evident by elongated geometries and surface points. And what I mean by that is you can kind of see on the map, the north zone and south zone have this north-northwest elongation just in their geometry of the resource outline. And if we look at the data sets, well, we see that north-northwest fault trend quite more obvious, but obviously the northeast and east-northeast ones are there. However, the quartz veins are, again, more of that north-northwest trend. And what we can see, the north and south zone probably has a north-northwest structural control. It's one of these shallow type gold copper porphyries with magnetite and higher grade. So we look at Dezati, and you can see with the map, it has more of a northeast elongation to it. So again, different than the north and south zone. And here, we can say potentially it's a more of a, oh, did I lose it? Right, I can go ahead. It's a bit like stretched, but I'll just go ahead. So again, similar trends with the north and south zone, and Dezati, we're seeing that more of a northeast control on the geometries there. And I guess one of the points arguing is that the Dezati is a bit more of a potentially a deeper in place porphyry with a copper moly gold and more sericitic alteration and generally lower grades. So the next thing is taking those structures and putting it on an interpreted geological map. We can break it up into 4 different blocks. These blocks are bounded by these major faults, so the north-northwest and east-northeast striking faults, and they have distinct geological alteration and geophysical patterns within them. So the west block here is what contains the north zone and south zone, and you can see it's more volcanics in green. The center block, we have Dezati and dominantly more intrusive rocks. The east block, it's more volcanics, and then down in the south, it's dominantly sediments. So now looking at the geophysics, so we had our geophysical data reprocessed by resource potential, and this is just one of the RTP images. And what we can see again are different signatures in these 4 blocks, as well as some signatures of the deposits. So the west block, we have dominantly mag low, with this northeast striking mag high, which is probably related to our batholith. And the central block is a circular mag high in the north, and then dominantly mag low in the south with some discrete mag highs. The east block, we have a small mag high in the north, and then a relative mag low in the center. And the south zone is a relatively mag low. And then some of this was used to help infer the geological map as well with the large batholiths. But then when we look at our actual deposits, like the north zone and south zone, what you can see is a really discrete mag high, and that's very typical of like a porphyry signature, potentially reflecting our magnetite-rich core, potassic core, and those discrete mag highs really map the north zone and south zone quite nicely. We look at Dezati, and you can see that there's no mag high in that zone, or in that deposit, which also kind of reflects the more sericitic alteration and the different style. And then you can see as well, there's obviously some subtle mag features, which are clear targets for us as well. So now looking at chargeability, a feature that pops up really nicely is those faults that were interpreted. Well, they're low chargeability in general, and then we look at the different blocks. West block, we have like a moderate chargeability. Center, it's very chargeable. East, it's uniformly moderate, and in the south, we're not seeing any chargeability there. and is a really distinct feature on the south side of that east-northeast striking fault. The north and south zone, they're moderately chargeable with this north-northwest elongation. And Tezate is, moderately to strongly chargeable, but not as chargeable as the rest of the block around it. So now looking at resistivity and conductivity, again, our faults match nicely with, they're a bit more in the moderate to high conductivity. The west block, moderately conductive with some resistive highs. The center block, really resistive. East block, strongly resistive with patches of moderate conductivity. And then the south, it's quite conductive. It's probably related to the sediments. And then, what does that look like in the north and south zone? Well, we have this moderate resistivity elongated to the north-northwest, and Tezate is weakly conductive. So now looking at alteration. So now we're talking a bit about alteration patterns from at Tepal, and this is like an idealized alteration patterns around calcocalic copper gold moly porphyry. This is something that we drafted in 2022 in a paper, and it's kind of showing the Corp and leach diagram on the right, which reflects acidity and temperature, and we're just showing minerals that are really spectrally active that you can see in the shortwave infrared. So obviously, you're missing vuggy quartz and some minerals off of this diagram, but it's going to just show you the alteration patterns you'd want to look for and expect around porphyries. So what I did was an alteration map drafted on new SWOR chip analysis. So some of these were analyzed and collected in previous mapping campaigns, and then we did a bunch more analysis on our Terra specs in Zacatecas and Guadalajara. And from this, got a new interpretation of the spectra from the surface, and then also, compiled historic data sets like mapped outcrop alteration, Aster, Landsat, and previous alteration in terps, and then a bit of alteration from geochem work. And then from this, polygons were made for mineral alteration groups favoring the SWOR analysis points. So this is what the new alteration map looks like. Yeah, apologies, it's like stretched. It doesn't look as nice. But so what you can see is distinct alteration patterns within the blocks. And also some signatures of our known deposits. So the west, what we see is more of a neutral alteration with probalytic, some sericitic probalytic, and some local advanced argillic alteration. In the central block, it's a bit more acidic with argillic alteration, clay alterations, and potentially some soda calcic in the north. East block, relatively unknown, but a bit more sericitic alteration, and there's no apparent alteration down in the south. And when we're looking at the deposits, what do we see there? The north and south zone, we're seeing like a broad probalytic halo with some inner probalytic and sericitic alteration, and then some proximal sericite and local discrete argillic and advanced argillic. There is an interesting zone here of advanced argillic to the west, so potentially that could be the roots of a lithocap. It could be related to the south zone, or it could be related to something else. So it's clearly an area of interest. And then Tezate, what we see, like a more of a broad argillic alteration with proximal sericite and some local discrete advanced argillic. And that's just a bit of the argillic and potentially some sort of calcic related to the batholith. In the south zone, you can kind of see in the gray, those are basically unaltered areas. And then when we go to the west, there's really no data. There's not a whole lot of data out in this southwest portion. All right, so how does that compare to some alteration patterns on other porphyry deposits? This is just a figure that I drafted off of multiple publications, and what you can see is this is how Tepal fits in, and we're seeing a very similar, on the same scale, size of alteration pattern that you might expect around a porphyry system. All right, so then the last bit, I'll just talk a bit about the geochemistry. So in porphyry exploration, we like to look for pathfinder elements, which are relatively immobile in a more dynamic hydrothermal environment. And so you look for there are very, very shallow plume elements, more shallow to intermediate to proximal to distal. And with these, so hopefully can guide you into that core of the system where your highest grade potassic cores. So these are the shallow pathfinders at Tepal, and again, this is based on rock and soil samples. And note that there's a lack of samples anywhere to the west, and so we can't really infer too much of the pattern over there because we don't really have the samples there. But anyways, we're looking at shallow pathfinders, and these are typically found in the in the shallow environment, epithermal environment. However, gold obviously reflects mineralization. And so what do we see? Well, the north and south zone, gold and silver, are well correlated, and they overlap, but there's a notable lack of arsenic, whereas the habitat, you have an overlapping gold, silver, and arsenic, but it's really with this really broad anomalous area as well of those elements elongated to the northeast. When we look at our proximal pathfinders, which are in this case, moly and copper. Again, a bit of a hesitant on the copper because that could be leached, but you want to see them sort of reflecting close to your like proximal porphyry core. And what we see is, north and south zone, the copper and moly are overlapping quite nicely with really distinct cutoff when you get to that north-northwest fault. And then Dizate, we have copper and moly overlapping in the center with a very anomalous zone going off to the north and also to the east-northeast. When we're looking at now distal, so distal pathfinders like lead and zinc, they're the broadest because they are leached from an acidic environment, and they'll precipitate in an area where it's a bit more neutral, such as the probolytic zone. And so we want to see that away from like the core. And I mean, if you look at north and south zone, that does seem to have your typical lack of distal pathfinders in the center, and then you have zinc enriched outboard to the north. And again, we don't really have data to the west to help figure out more of that halo there. But then when we look at Dizate, you can also argue, you have that typical lack of distal pathfinders in the center. But again, with like some of the other elements, it has this really broad anomalous area of these distal pathfinders of zinc and lead to the north and northeast. And if we go even further away, you can see quite a distal zinc and lead enrichment. All right, so I guess to conclude and sum up, so Tepal's known deposits really display key features of gold, copper, plus or minus moly porphyries. And our exploration targets are now defined in rank, having identified the deposit type characteristics and using a combination of structure alteration, geochem, geophysics, and geology. So here's just some example of a table. I'm not expecting you to read the text, but looking at the geochem anomalies, geophysical anomalies, and having a preliminary interp on what I might mean. And from that, we rank our targets, and here's just a map that kind of shows, where some of our targets are in the area. So there's, obviously potential to grow the north and south zone in Dizate, but also to find other targets in our porphyry camp. So yeah, with this, hopefully we have a plan for future, hopefully successful exploration and growth of the Tepal project. And thank you. Yes.